Maybe you've had a long day, a day filled with noise, with tasks unfinished, with thoughts that would not rest. Now, as night spreads its quiet wings, you are invited into stillness, to breathe, to soften, and to dwell once more in the peace of God. Listen to the night around you. The air is cool and calm. The stars hang like ancient prayers over a world that never truly sleeps. And yet, in this moment, you are free to let everything slow down. Let every worry fade like mist over the hills. Let the weight of the day drift from your shoulders. You are safe here. You are seen. You are loved. Tonight, we'll wander softly through one of the oldest and most mysterious journeys in Scripture, the story of Job, the man who walked through both blessing and sorrow, and found, in the end, that the whisper of God was worth more than all the gold of the earth. Through 100 sacred moments, we'll trace his footsteps, from the dawn of his peace to the ashes of his trial, from the silence of grief to the voice that spoke out of the whirlwind. Each truth will unfold like a candle's flicker, illuminating your heart with gentle wisdom and quiet trust. So close your eyes now, take a deep breath, and let the peace of God surround you as we begin our pilgrimage through the story of Job. Let every word be a soft lantern in the night, guiding your spirit towards stillness and rest. Fact 1. The man from Uz. Before sorrow ever touched his name, there lived a man in the land of Uz, whose life was full and whose faith was pure. His name was Job, a man upright and blameless, who turned away from evil and walked in reverence before God. The land he lived in was quiet, golden, and wide, filled with herds and the laughter of children. Job's heart was a temple of gratitude. He rose early to pray for his family, offering sacrifices for each of his children, just in case they had spoken a careless word against heaven. Even in his wealth, he feared pride. Even in his peace, he bowed low. In Job's calm days, faith was not tested. It was simply trusted. Fact 2. A life overflowing with blessing. Job's fields rippled like waves under the morning sun. Thousands of animals grazed across the plains, a living testament to diligence and divine favor. 7 sons and 3 daughters filled his home with song and celebration. They gathered often to feast, to share joy, to honor one another in love. Job's world was ordered and blessed, a picture of how life was meant to be when harmony reigned between heaven and earth. He did not boast, nor did he forget the giver. Each dawn was a hymn, each sunset a prayer. But even in perfect peace, unseen mysteries stir in the courts of heaven, and not even the righteous are hidden from the gaze of eternity. Fact 3. The heavenly gathering. Far beyond the clouds and constellations, a day came when the sons of God gathered before the Lord. Among them walked the accuser, the ancient adversary, whose voice whispers doubt into every age. The Lord, who sees the heart of man, spoke of his servant Job, a soul upright, unwavering, shining with devotion. But the accuser challenged heaven's joy. "Does Job fear God for nothing?" he asked. And thus began a test, not of wealth or strength, but of worship, a test to reveal whether love could stand when blessings fell away. The heavens held their breath as the story turned. Fact 4. The hedge of protection. Before the storm, there was a shield, a divine hedge that surrounded Job, guarding his house, his flocks, his family. Every field he owned seemed wrapped in unseen mercy. But now, at the permission of God, that hedge began to lower, not as punishment, but as purpose, that the purity of faith might shine brighter than gold refined in fire. Sometimes, God allows the winds to blow, not to destroy us, but to reveal the roots that hold us. And in the unseen realm, love prepared to prove itself stronger than loss. Fact 5. The first messenger. The day was bright when the first messenger came running. His face was pale with fear. "The Sabians fell upon your oxen and donkeys," he cried, "and slew your servants with the sword." Even as he spoke, another arrived, trembling, breathless. "Fire from heaven burned your sheep and shepherds." And then another. "The Chaldeans raided your camels." Each word was a wave of loss, until the final messenger arrived with the heaviest blow of all. His children, Job's joy and pride, were gone. The wind had taken them in a single moment of storm, and silence fell upon Job's house like ashes upon an altar. Fact 6. The torn robe and the bowed heart Job stood amid the wreckage of his world. No wealth, no children, only the cold wind and the echo of what once was. He tore his robe in grief, a sacred sign of mourning, and he fell to the ground in worship. Not anger, not accusation, but worship. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return," he whispered. "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In that moment, heaven heard something no storm could silence, the song of a broken heart that still believed. Fact 7. The second trial. Time passed, and again the sons of God gathered. Once more the accuser stood among them, unsatisfied by Job's unshaken faith. "Touch his body," the adversary said, "and he will curse you to your face." Permission was granted, yet not beyond mercy's bounds. Job's life would remain, but his health would not. Pain rose like a tide upon his flesh. Boils and fever covered him, and he sat among the ashes, scraping his wounds with a shard of pottery. Yet even in agony, Job's spirit clung to reverence. Faith, when stripped of comfort, becomes its truest form. Fact 8. The voice of despair. Job's wife, broken and bitter from loss, looked upon him and cried, "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." Her words came not from wickedness, but from unbearable sorrow. Grief speaks in strange languages when hearts are shattered. But Job answered gently, "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" He did not blame her. He did not curse. He sat quietly in the ashes, a living prayer in a silent land. Even love can falter in the shadow of pain, but the light of faith glows most clearly in the night. Fact 9. The coming of friends. Far away, 3 friends heard of Job's suffering: Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They came to comfort him, but when they saw his face, they wept aloud. For 7 days and nights they sat beside him on the ground and spoke not a word. Their silence was sacred, a shared grief beyond speech. Sometimes presence is the purest form of love. No wisdom, no words, only the gift of being there. Job's pain was not erased, but in their company, he was not alone beneath the ashes. Fact 10. The cry breaks the silence. After 7 days, the silence broke. Job opened his mouth, and the first sound of his lament filled the air. He did not curse God. He cursed the day of his birth. A soul pushed beyond the edges of endurance, crying not for answers, but for understanding. His words rose like smoke into heaven's quiet. Why was I not hidden in the ground like a stillborn child? It was not rebellion. It was the language of pain seeking God. Even in despair, Job's heart reached upward, and God, though silent, listened. And as the first sorrows unfold, remember this: faith is not the absence of grief, but the presence of God within it. When the world feels broken and the night endless, He is still the gentle whisper that calls your name. So breathe softly now. Let your heart rest in the stillness between questions. Job's story will continue, but for a moment, let peace settle over you like quiet dew upon the fields of ooze. Fact 11. The friend who spoke first. At last, the stillness gave way to words. Eliphaz the Temanite lifted his voice, calm, measured, confident in the patterns he believed governed heaven. He spoke of the innocent never perishing, and of suffering as the harvest of hidden sin. His tone carried both care and certainty, but his wisdom came wrapped in presumption. Eliphaz could not see the unseen counsel above, nor the purpose beyond pain. He meant to comfort, yet his words pierced deeper than silence. Sometimes the greatest misunderstanding comes not from strangers, but from those who love us and cannot bear our questions. Job listened, weary, bewildered, and the ashes beneath him stirred with the weight of misjudged faith. Fact 12. The heart's defense. When Eliphaz finished, Job answered softly, his voice trembling between sorrow and disbelief. "Oh, that my anguish could be weighed," he cried, "for it would outweigh the sand of the seas." He longed not for correction, but for compassion, for someone to sit beside him and see his pain without explanation. He knew that the hand of God was heavy upon him, yet he could not curse the one who had always been his life. Faith can coexist with confusion. Love can cry out and still remain loyal. In his reply, Job revealed the soul's honest prayer, not perfect, not polished, but pure in its yearning to be heard. Fact 13. The river of questions night fell over the ashes, and Job's lament flowed on like a river through dark valleys. He asked why those who suffer are left to grope in shadow, why the wicked seem to prosper while the innocent weep. He did not know his cries echoed through eternity, teaching generations that doubt does not drive God away. It draws him near. Each question was a step upon a path of faith deeper than certainty itself. Job's sorrow became scripture, his silence a sanctuary for all who suffer. And though the heavens remained quiet, the heart of God was already moving toward him, slowly, tenderly, as dawn toward the edge of night. Fact 14. Bildad's voice of order. When Eliphaz's words faded into the wind, Bildad the Shuhite began to speak. He was a man of balance and structure, certain that righteousness always brought reward, and that sin always summoned ruin. He urged Job to repent, to restore the lost harmony between heaven and man. His speech was neat, his reasoning flawless, and yet it did not touch the mystery of mercy. Bildad's world had no room for innocent suffering, no space for the grief of the blameless. He meant to defend God, but in doing so, he forgot that God needs no defense, only trust. Job heard his words and bowed his head, feeling the ache of being judged by those who could not see the full story written in heaven. Fact 15. Job's lament. Beneath the stars. That night, Job lifted his eyes toward the stars, the same stars that once watched him in prosperity, now glittering coldly above the dust of his despair. He spoke to the silence, to the God who once felt near, but now seemed far. "What is man, that you magnify him?" he whispered. He could not grasp why the Almighty, who shaped galaxies and called light from darkness, would set his gaze upon one frail soul with such piercing scrutiny. Yet even in confusion, Job's prayer was born of reverence. He did not demand justice. He sought understanding. Faith does not always sing. Sometimes it sighs. And even a sigh, when breathed heavenward, becomes a psalm in the dark. Fact 16. Zophar's sharp counsel. Zophar the Naamathite, the youngest of the three, could no longer keep silent. His words struck like flint. Should your idle talk silence men? If only God would speak, he would show you the secrets of wisdom. He believed Job's suffering must be less than he deserved, that the scales of heaven had spared him even worse. But the wounded heart does not heal beneath accusation. Zophar's truth lacked tenderness, and truth without tenderness can wound more deeply than a sword. Job's friends had come to comfort, but their certainty built walls instead of bridges. And Job sat alone again, not only in pain, but in the quiet misunderstanding of those who could not see grace through the smoke. Fact 17. The cry for an audience with God. After the words of his friends had stung and scattered like dust, Job lifted his heart to the heavens. He longed not for answers, but for an audience. Oh, that I might plead my case before him, he whispered. He did not want to win an argument. He wanted to be seen. In his longing, we glimpse the human heart's deepest desire, to be known by its maker, even in its brokenness. Job's prayer reached into the silence, and though no reply came, the act of reaching itself became holy. Faith often lives between words, in the pauses, in the yearning, in the quiet endurance of not yet understanding. Fact 18. The wisdom hidden in the depths. Time passed, and Job's thoughts turned inward like roots seeking water. He began to ponder the mystery of wisdom, where it dwells, and who can find it. Man does not know its place, he said softly. It is hidden from the eyes of all living. He spoke of miners digging deep into the earth, searching for gold and sapphires, and yet wisdom, true, eternal wisdom, could not be unearthed by hands or light. God understands its way, Job concluded. He realized that wisdom begins not in knowledge, but in reverence. And even as he sat in dust and sorrow, he was already touching the edges of divine insight, that to fear God is to begin to see. Fact 19. The faith that remains. Though his skin burned and his heart trembled, Job's faith did not fade away. He looked beyond his pain and declared words that would echo through centuries of worship. I know that my Redeemer lives. In a world of ruin, he spoke of redemption. In the valley of death, he whispered of life. He did not yet know how or when, but he believed that God would one day stand upon the earth, and that he, Job, would see him with his own eyes. That quiet confession became a spark in the dark, a promise whispered to all who suffer, that loss is not the end, and life will rise again. Fact 20. The God who seems silent. Job looked into the night sky and found only silence. He longed for the voice that once guided him, for the nearness that once wrapped him like dawn. Now there was only stillness, and in that stillness his faith was tested not by wrath, but by absence. He cried out, yet no answer came. Still, he did not turn away. There is a holiness in the silence of God, a depth where trust is shaped without proof, where love breathes without reward. The stars glimmered above his ash heap, each one a quiet witness that light remains even when unseen. And Job learned that waiting can be worship too. Fact 21. The mockery of men. The once honored man became a shadow in his own land. Those who once bowed before him now mocked his name. Children laughed at his scars. Outcasts jeered at his fall. The dust of humiliation clung to him more than his wounds. Yet Job did not curse those who taunted him. He simply lowered his head and remembered that breath itself is a gift. When the world stripped away dignity, he discovered the quiet nobility of endurance. To be mocked and remain gentle, to be broken and remain kind, That is a greater strength than all crowns. And though the laughter of men stung like thorns, he knew heaven was watching with compassion, not contempt. Fact 22. The God who measures the heart job began to speak of justice, not the kind men measure in courts, but the justice known only to God. He declared that human eyes see only the surface, but the Almighty weighs the heart. He wondered if, perhaps, suffering was not punishment, but preparation, not rejection, but refinement. He could not yet see the ending, but somewhere within the ash and sorrow, his spirit began to awaken to a larger truth, that righteousness is not a shield from storms, but a lamp within them. And as Job pondered, he did not know that the same God he sought in silence was already nearer than breath. Fact 23. The lament of the lonely. The nights grew long, and Job's companions grew weary. Their words had turned from comfort to correction, and their silence, once sacred, became heavy with judgment. In the hollow hours before dawn, Job spoke to the emptiness around him. My relatives have gone away. My friends have forgotten me. Even the servants he once cared for turned from him. Loneliness pressed upon his chest like stone. Yet even in isolation, Job lifted his eyes toward heaven. He whispered to the God who seemed far, and that whisper was a seed of hope. For when all voices fall silent, the smallest prayer still reaches the ear of eternity. Fact 24. The memory of mercy. Amid his sorrow, Job's mind wandered back to gentler days, when God's lamp shone upon his path, when the laughter of children filled his house, when his words were respected at the city gate. He remembered blessing, not to mourn it, but to honor it. Memories can wound, but they can also warm. They remind the weary that goodness once bloomed, and that what once was beautiful may yet return. Job's recollection was not bitterness. It was longing wrapped in gratitude. And though he did not know it, his remembering was a form of faith, trusting that the God who gave such light before could bring a dawn again, even after the darkest night. Fact 25. The cry for vindication. In his pain, Job cried for a witness, someone to stand between heaven and earth and testify that his heart had been true. Oh, that my words were written, he said, engraved on stone forever. He wanted his story to endure, so that even if his life faded, truth would remain. That cry became a prophecy in itself. For Job's story was written, and his endurance became scripture. He could not know how many weary souls would one day draw comfort from his faith. But God was already answering his prayer, turning anguish into testimony, and pain into a song for generations yet to rest beneath its rhythm. Fact 26. The majesty of God revealed. Job lifted his gaze to the heavens, and though his heart was still heavy, his spirit began to see what sorrow had hidden. He spoke of God's wonders, of the earth suspended over nothing, of clouds heavy with water yet never torn apart, of thunder that whispers his power. Job's lament turned to worship, and in naming creation, he named the faithfulness behind it. The pillars of heaven tremble, he said, and by his breath the skies are made fair. Even in despair, awe found its way through the cracks of pain. For sometimes, when answers fail, it is wonder that steadies the soul. Fact 27. The integrity within Job's friends still doubted, believing hidden sin must dwell somewhere beneath his sorrow. But Job stood quietly within his truth. Till I die, he said, I will not deny my integrity. He did not claim perfection, only honesty, a heart transparent before God. Integrity is not pride. It is faith's gentle backbone. It whispers, I will not let go of who I am before my Maker. And though his body trembled with weakness, Job's conscience remained clear and steadfast, a candle refusing to extinguish in the storm. The righteousness he clung to was not self-made. It was the quiet strength of trust that endures unseen. Fact 28. The longing for days gone by. There came a night when Job spoke tenderly of what once was. He remembered walking through the city and how the poor blessed him for his kindness, how he clothed the needy and guided the lost. His memory was not vanity, it was love remembering its purpose. He felt the ache of what had been taken, but even in recalling it, he reaffirmed the good. To remember mercy is to keep it alive, even when the world forgets. And though he could not see God's plan, the same compassion that had moved through him before was still alive, waiting to bloom again in the garden of restoration. Fact 29. The mystery of justice. Job pondered the ways of the world, how the wicked seemed to flourish, building houses that echoed with laughter, while the righteous walked through dust and tears. He could not understand why heaven allowed such imbalance. Yet even as he wrestled, his words became a mirror for every soul that has ever questioned divine fairness. He did not accuse, he simply wondered aloud, and in doing so, he opened a sacred space where honesty met reverence. Faith that cannot ask questions is too fragile to endure. Job's heart, though troubled, remained bowed in awe, trusting that what he could not see was still held by the hand of a just and merciful God. Fact 30. The brevity of life. There came a soft moment when Job turned from anger to reflection. He spoke of human days as wind-blown shadows, of our years as a breath that fades before the dawn. Man born of woman is few of days and full of trouble, he sighed, like a flower that blooms and is gone. And yet, hidden in those words was a tender truth, that life's brevity makes each moment sacred. In realizing how swiftly we pass through this world, Job began to cherish the fragile beauty of simply being. Even sorrow became a teacher, showing him that what matters most is not how long we live, but how deeply we love beneath the fleeting sun. Fact 31. The courage to wait. The wind carried Job's prayer into the stillness. All the days of my struggle I will wait until my renewal comes. He did not know when that renewal would arrive, but he believed it would. This was not resignation. It was hope refined by fire. Waiting became his act of worship, his silence a song that only heaven could hear. To wait without bitterness is to dwell near the heart of God. And as the night deepened over the land of Uz, faith quietly began to glow again, like the first star returning to the evening sky. Fact 32. The younger voice speaks. When the three friends had no words left to offer, another stood among them, Elihu, the youngest. He had waited in humility, listening to the elders speak their reasonings and rebukes. Now, with trembling reverence, he began to speak. I am full of words, he said, and the breath within me compels me. He did not come to accuse, but to awaken. Elihu's youth did not make him proud. It made him attentive. He reminded Job that suffering may also refine, that pain may carry a hidden purpose known only to God. His words were gentle and searching, and in their quiet honesty, a shift began. From argument to revelation, from man's wisdom toward the whisper of heaven. Fact 33. The breath of the Almighty. Elihu spoke of something deeper than experience, the breath of the Almighty that gives life and understanding to all. He reminded the weary that wisdom is not found in age alone, nor in knowledge, but in the Spirit who inspires truth within the humble heart. "The Spirit of God has made me," he said softly, "and the breath of the Almighty gives me life." His words floated over the ashes like a healing wind. In every age, God's breath continues to move unseen, reviving what sorrow has silenced and rekindling faith in those who thought hope had died. Elihu's message was not condemnation, but compassion, a quiet reminder that even in despair, we are still being held, still being taught by the breath that first called us to being. Fact 34. The thunder of his voice. As Elihu's speech deepened, his eyes lifted toward the horizon where storm clouds gathered. He spoke of God's voice rolling through thunder, of lightning that announces his power, and of rain that renews the barren ground. "Listen to the rumble of his voice," Elihu urged, "and the sound that comes from his mouth." He saw in the storm not wrath, but revelation, a symbol of the divine majesty that humbles human pride. For even the tempest serves a tender purpose, to remind creation that God is near, and that his power, though vast and fearsome, is guided always by love. Fact 35. The justice that never sleeps. Elihu's voice carried softly through the stillness, reminding Job that God's justice does not slumber. "Do you think this to be right?" he asked, "that you say, 'My righteousness is more than God's'?" He spoke not to shame, but to awaken humility, to remind the sufferer that heaven sees what human eyes cannot. "The Almighty will not pervert justice," Elihu said. And though Job still could not understand his pain, these words stirred a quiet truth within him, that even in what feels unjust, there may be a wisdom unfolding unseen. The night does not mean abandonment. It may be the gentle shadow beneath which divine purpose grows. Fact 36. The storm of glory approaches. As Elihu spoke, a wind began to rise. Thunder rolled across the distance, and the first flash of lightning illuminated the horizon. He lifted his face and declared, "God's voice thunders in marvelous ways. He does great things beyond our understanding." Elihu's words became the bridge between silence and revelation. The storm was not a threat, it was a doorway. In its rumble, creation announced that the Almighty was near. Rain cleanses, wind renews, thunder awakens. Every sound in nature became a hymn of divine arrival. And Job, sitting among the ashes, felt for the first time a stirring, the sense that his cries had indeed been heard. Fact 37. The voice from the whirlwind. Then the sky split open with light and wind, and from the heart of the storm came the voice of God. It was not the voice of anger, but of infinite majesty, clothed in power and calm. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? The question rolled through the air like thunder, not to condemn, but to call. God spoke, not with explanations, but with wonders. The sea, the stars, the creatures of his hand. He invited Job to see the vastness of his creation, and to understand that trust, not logic, is the true language of faith. And in that moment, Job's silence became worship. Fact 38. The foundations of the earth. The voice from the whirlwind asked, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding." Each question shimmered with power and tenderness. God did not crush Job with rebuke. He lifted his gaze beyond the ash heap to the architecture of eternity. He spoke of morning stars singing together, and of boundaries set for the sea. Creation itself became a sermon of humility and awe. Through these words, Job began to see that he was part of something vast, woven into a design that only God could comprehend. Sometimes, peace does not come through answers, but through remembering how small we are in the hands of infinite love. Fact 39. The wild and the free. The divine voice continued, painting pictures of creatures untamed by man's control. He spoke of the mountain goat giving birth, of the wild donkey laughing at the noise of the city, of the ostrich flapping her wings without wisdom, and of the horse that snorts with courage at the trumpet's call. Every living thing, in its strangeness and strength, was a reflection of divine artistry. Job listened, realizing that God's care extended even to the wild, to the forgotten and the fierce alike. The world was not chaos, it was complex harmony, and in that realization, Job's heart softened. He saw that if God governed the beasts of the field with wisdom, surely he could govern the path of one wounded soul. Fact 40. The Leviathan's lesson. Then the Lord spoke of Leviathan, the mighty creature of the deep, whose scales glimmered like armor and whose breath kindled flame. Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook? God asked. The question was not mockery, but mercy. It reminded Job that the forces beyond his control were never beyond God's. Leviathan, symbol of chaos itself, was subject to the Creator's will. And in that truth lay comfort, that nothing wild or fearful can escape the sovereignty of love. The storm still roared, but Job's heart grew quiet, for he knew, finally, that the one who commands the whirlwind also holds the heart of man in peace. Fact 41. The silence after the storm. When the thunder quieted and the lightning ceased, a stillness covered the land of Uz. The storm that had once terrified now felt sacred, its echoes lingering like the memory of a hymn. Job sat among the ashes and listened to the quiet. He had heard of God before, but now he had heard him. The air itself seemed alive with holy peace. No answer had been given in words, yet every question within him had been met by presence. The storm had not destroyed, it had revealed. And Job began to understand that sometimes God does not explain his mysteries. He simply reveals his heart through nearness. Fact 42. The heart that bows. Then Job spoke again, but this time his tone was changed. No longer defiant, no longer desperate, only humbled and whole. I know that you can do all things, he whispered, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. He confessed that he had spoken of things too wonderful to know. He bowed in awe, not in defeat. True wisdom had finally taken root, the wisdom of surrender. In the ashes of misunderstanding, Job found the treasure of trust. He covered his mouth in reverence, not out of shame, but because the language of peace is often silence. In that sacred quiet, his heart rested at last within the will of God. Fact 43. The hands of restoration. Then came dawn, soft, golden, and merciful. The Lord turned his gaze toward Job, not in judgment, but in delight. He spoke forgiveness over Job's friends and commanded them to seek Job's prayer for their healing. And when Job prayed for them, the heavens opened with favor once more. His fortunes were restored, his fields bloomed again, and laughter returned to his home. Yet this was not the same man who began the story. His riches were renewed, but his soul was transformed. Blessing was no longer proof of God's love. It was the overflow of a faith proven true. And the morning light that rose over Uz seemed to whisper one eternal truth. Love never leaves us in ashes forever. Fact 44. The prayer that heals. When Job lifted his voice to pray for his friends, his heart was still tender from loss. He might have refused them, for their words had pierced him deeply in his pain. Yet he chose mercy over memory. In that simple act of grace, something unseen shifted in heaven. Forgiveness opened the floodgates of blessing. Job's prayer did more than heal others. It healed the quiet places within himself. For prayer offered in love always finds its way back as peace. And as he prayed, the same wind that once carried his cries of anguish now carried his words of compassion. The night was passing. A new dawn was quietly being born. Fact 45. The double portion. Then the Lord restored Job's fortunes, not just what he had lost, but twice as much. Flocks once stolen now filled his pastures again, and his house, once silent, rang with joy. His brothers, sisters, and friends returned to him, offering comfort and gifts of gold. Yet Job's truest treasure was not measured in numbers. It was the peace that had grown in him through suffering. For those who walk through fire with faith return carrying light. Every blessing that followed was a reflection of grace, not repayment, but renewal. God does not simply return what was lost. He recreates it, fashioned in deeper beauty, woven with eternal meaning. Fact 46. The children of his latter days. In the gentle years that followed, Job became a father once more. 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him again, each one a symbol of God's mercy. He named his daughters Jemima, Kezia, and Karen Hapuch, names of beauty, fragrance, and preciousness. And the scriptures say there were no women in the land as fair as Job's daughters. He gave them inheritance among their brothers, breaking the customs of his age. For grace had widened his heart beyond law and tradition. His love had been refined, his faith made tender. Every child's laughter echoed through the house like a hymn of restoration. The ashes had turned to joy, and Job's home had become a temple of gratitude. Fact 47. The peace of his later years. The days that followed were not marked by triumph, but by tender stillness. Job rose with the sun and walked his fields, each breeze whispering memories of mercy. He did not cling to what had been lost, nor boast in what was restored. He simply lived, humbly, gratefully, fully. The once restless man had become a quiet sage, his eyes soft with compassion, his hands gentle with those who suffered. He had seen how swiftly joy can fade, and how faithfully grace returns. Every moment became an altar, every breath a prayer, and in the calm rhythm of his days, Job found what his wealth could never buy, a peace that asked for nothing more. Fact 48. The circle of blessing. Those who had once pitied Job now sought his counsel. Travelers came from far lands to hear his words, and he welcomed them with kindness, not pride. He spoke little of his trials, preferring instead to tell of God's faithfulness. He reminded the weary that suffering is not the end, but a passage, a door that leads, if we are patient, to deeper love. And as he shared his story, each listener left lighter, their burdens softened by hope. For when a heart healed by grace speaks of what it has learned, its words become medicine. And so, Job's life turned outward again, his pain transformed into a ministry of peace. Fact 49. The wisdom of the quiet path. As age drew near, Job no longer sought to understand everything. He had learned that some truths are too vast for reason, but not too distant for trust. He walked slowly, seeing beauty in the ordinary, in the shimmer of morning dew, in the laughter of his grandchildren, in the silent company of stars. His wisdom was not thunderous, but gentle as rainfall on thirsty earth. He no longer asked why, for he had learned who, and that knowing, simple, sacred, and sure, was enough. Faith had brought him full circle, from abundance to loss, from sorrow to surrender, and finally to rest. Fact 50. The Midway Reflection. Beneath the stars of promise. Half our journey has passed, and we now stand beneath the same stars that watched over Job. Each one burns quietly with a promise that the God who once seemed silent was always near, shaping mercy from mystery. Job's story is not only about suffering, but about awakening, the soul learning to trust what eyes cannot see. So, breathe deeply now. Let your heart settle in this sacred stillness. The same God who spoke from the whirlwind still speaks in the hush of your spirit. Close your eyes and feel his nearness. You do not need to understand everything. Just rest. The journey continues, but for a moment, let the peace of heaven linger upon you like starlight. Fact 51. The Blessing of Longevity. In the gentle years that followed, Job lived to see his children's children. 4 generations gathered around him, each one a living testament of restoration. The laughter of grandchildren echoed through his home like soft music from another world. He watched them grow, watched seasons come and go, and found beauty in their simple joy. Every sunrise became a reminder that life, though fragile, endures through love. He had once sat in ashes, but now he sat in the quiet company of grace. The God who allowed his suffering had also written joy into his ending. And Job's days, long and full, were wrapped in the gentle mercy of one who had learned the language of gratitude. Fact 52. The Whisper of Eternity. When Job's time upon the earth was complete, he closed his eyes in peace. The same breath that once cried in anguish now exhaled into eternity, calm and unafraid. He had seen the depths of loss, the mystery of pain, and the beauty of redemption. His story did not end in sorrow, but in quiet reunion with the one he had sought. The angels who once watched his trial now sang him home, and the book of his life, written in tears and faith, was sealed with light. For those who trust through darkness are never truly forsaken. They are only being prepared for the everlasting morning. Fact 53. The Story That Endures. Long after Job had entered his rest, his story continued to travel, carried on the tongues of wanderers and the scrolls of the wise. It passed from generation to generation, a sacred reminder that faith can survive the fiercest storms. His name became a song of endurance, a whisper in the night to those who suffer. Be patient, as Job was patient, the scriptures would one day say. And through that patience, he became more than a man. He became a symbol of perseverance wrapped in humility. Each time his story is told, another heart finds courage to keep believing when heaven seems silent. In that way, Job never truly vanished. His faith still lives wherever hope refuses to die. Fact 54. The God who watches in the waiting Job's life reminds us that the waiting seasons are not empty. They are sacred ground. When prayers seem unanswered, God is not absent. He is shaping understanding within us. There are lessons that cannot bloom in sunlight, but only grow in the soil of shadow. In the long quiet between prayer and response, the soul learns to listen differently. Job's cries were never ignored. They were being gathered. Each one, a seed of future mercy. And when the time was right, God's answer arrived not in explanation, but in presence. For what the heart truly needs is not always reason, but reassurance. In every waiting heart, the divine still watches, softly weaving redemption through unseen threads of time. Fact 55. The Scripture's gentle echo. The book of Job ends not with triumphal noise, but with stillness, a hush that invites reflection. Its final verses read like the closing of a prayer, a soft amen over human suffering and divine faithfulness. No grand sermon follows, for the story itself has become the sermon. It tells us that faith is not destroyed by pain, it is refined through it. That God's silence does not mean absence, it means He is nearer than we imagine. And that one day, when all storms are spent, every soul that endures will hear what Job heard, not the wind, but the voice within it, the gentle sound of eternal love. Fact 56. The faith that outlives the flame. Though Job's body returned to the dust, his faith continued to burn. A quiet flame in the story of humankind. It flickers still wherever hearts are tested and prayers seem unanswered. Each believer who whispers through tears, "I will still trust," walks the same sacred path he once walked. Job's endurance became an inheritance for every soul that suffers, a proof that love can outlast pain. When all that is visible falls away, what remains is the unseen, the steadfast devotion that cannot be touched by fire or loss. The book of Job is not only his memory, it is a mirror showing us the part of ourselves that keeps believing when everything else falls silent. Fact 57. The whisper beneath suffering. Job's story reminds us that pain, though fierce, can become the doorway through which compassion enters. In his ashes, Job learned to see not only God's sovereignty, but the quiet ache of others who suffer unseen. Through loss, his heart grew tender. Through waiting, it grew wise. Suffering is never sacred by itself, but when it is surrendered, it transforms into empathy. The same fire that scorches can purify. The same tears that fall can water another's healing. And so, even now, Job's voice lingers across centuries, a whisper saying, "Do not curse the night, for sometimes the stars can only be seen from its depths." Fact 58. The pattern of redemption. In Job's beginning was blessing, in his middle was testing, and in his end was restoration. But the truest miracle was not what he gained again. It was who he became. He began as a man of righteousness. He ended as a man of revelation. The pattern of his life mirrors the pattern of grace, creation, trial, renewal. This rhythm beats quietly beneath every human story. Each loss hides a seed of resurrection. Each silence conceals a coming song. Job's journey was not a detour from God's plan. It was the plan, a living parable of how sorrow can become sanctuary when placed in the hands of the eternal. Fact 59. The God who draws near. In the depth of Job's silence, when words had run dry and tears could no longer fall, God came near. Not as an explanation, but as a presence. Not to debate, but to dwell. He did not send angels or visions. He came himself, wrapped in wind and wonder. For the greatest mercy is not always rescue. It is communion. When the Almighty spoke from the storm, He was not far away, but closer than breath, answering the ache of Job's longing. And that same nearness, soft and unseen, comes even now to those who weep in faith. A gentle reminder that God may appear hidden, yet He is never gone. Fact 60. The wisdom of surrender. Through all his questioning, Job discovered that surrender is not defeat. It is trust purified of demand. He learned that faith does not need to control outcomes. It only needs to remain. When he finally said, "I know that you can do all things," his heart was not giving up. It was opening. Surrender is the quiet turning of the soul toward light, even when the path ahead is dim. It is the moment when striving ceases and resting begins. Job's story teaches that there is power in simply releasing the need to understand. For once, the heart bows before the mystery, it becomes free to receive peace. Fact 61. The eternal comfort. As centuries passed, Job's voice became part of a greater chorus, the harmony of those who trust beyond sight. Prophets, psalmists, and apostles would all echo his faith in their own songs of endurance. His endurance was the seed, their hope, the bloom. Through their words, the comfort Job found at last spread to countless generations. And even now, when someone prays through tears, when someone clings to hope in silence, the spirit of Job's story breathes beside them. It says, "You are not alone." It reminds the world that divine compassion is not bound by time, and that every trial, when held in love, becomes part of the eternal melody of redemption. Fact 62. The Song of the Redeemed. In the hush after suffering, there rose within Job a melody that was not learned but remembered, a song of redemption, older than grief itself. It was the sound of a soul recognizing its maker. No instrument played it, no lips spoke it. It simply was. When he said, "I know that my Redeemer lives," those words became the heartbeat of faith for generations unborn. Even now, when hearts tremble and eyes close in prayer, that same eternal song hums quietly beneath our breath. It is the sound of hope refusing to die, the soft assurance that every soul, once touched by God, is destined to rise again into his light. Fact 63. The tenderness of God. As Job's story settled into peace, it revealed a truth hidden from the beginning, that the Almighty is not only power, but tenderness beyond measure. He does not merely command the stars. He stoops to comfort his children in the dust. Every tear that fell from Job's eyes was counted, not forgotten. Every sigh was heard, and every silence was understood. God's greatness is not distance. It is nearness and compassion. He governs galaxies, yet bends low enough to touch the broken heart. The same hands that shaped the mountains gently lifted Job from his ashes. And in that embrace, Job discovered that love is the truest form of strength. Fact 64. The lesson for every soul. The story of Job is not meant to frighten, it is meant to free. It teaches that life will shift like sand, but faith, once anchored in God, will hold. It shows that pain does not mean punishment, and waiting does not mean abandonment. It reminds us that when everything else fades, wealth, health, even understanding, one thing remains, the presence of God. And that presence, though unseen, is enough to heal, to guide, to renew. So when the night grows long and the wind whispers your name, remember Job's peace and rest in the truth that all things, in the end, are held gently within the hands of grace. Fact 65. The lamp that never went out. Even in his darkest hour, when Job sat in silence and ashes, the lamp of faith within him never went out. Its flame wavered, but it never died. He questioned. He wept. He fell to his knees. Yet beneath every cry was the whisper of trust. Faith does not always shout. Sometimes it simply refuses to fade. It glows quietly through despair, lighting the next small step when the road is lost. That same lamp still burns in every believer's heart. It is the light that says, "I do not understand, but I will still believe." And though storms may rise and shadows stretch long, the flame of faith, kindled by God Himself, can never be extinguished. Fact 66. The glory, hidden in suffering. Job's story reveals a secret. Glory often hides within what seems unbearable. Suffering, when surrendered, becomes sacred soil where divine compassion grows. The pain that feels like breaking may actually be the shaping of eternity within us. God does not waste sorrow. He transforms it. Through loss, Job gained vision. Through silence, He learned the language of presence. The very place that seemed cursed became the doorway to blessing. So too, in our own wounds, God is often writing something beautiful, a story that can only be told through the tenderness of endurance. And when we rise from our ashes, we carry the light that once found us there. Fact 67. The River of Rest. By the end of his journey, Job had become like a river, quiet, deep, and unafraid to flow wherever God would lead. His soul no longer fought against the current, it moved with it. He had learned that rest is not the absence of trouble, but the presence of trust. The same hands that allowed the storm were the hands that guided him to calm waters. Every rushing tide of sorrow had led him home. And there, in that stillness, Job discovered what every soul longs to know, that peace is not found in answers, but in abiding, drifting safely in the current of divine love. Fact 68. The fellowship of the broken Job's journey reminds us that brokenness is not isolation, it is invitation. In his ashes, Job joined the hidden fellowship of all who have suffered and still chosen to believe. Their hearts form a silent communion, souls who pray through tears, who love through loss, who trust through pain. Each carries a spark of Job's endurance, and together they light the dark corners of the world. Suffering becomes sacred when it softens the heart, when it teaches compassion instead of bitterness. And in that shared humanity, we find that we are never alone in our trials. The same God who met Job in the whirlwind walks gently beside every soul that trembles in faith. Fact 69. The voice that still speaks. Though centuries have passed, the voice that spoke to Job still speaks. It echoes not in thunder now, but in the quiet places of the heart. When we feel forgotten, it whispers, "I am here." When we lose our way, it reminds us, "I still guide the stars." That same divine voice breathes through scripture, through prayer, through moments of still awareness. It is the voice that calls creation into being, and yet stoops low enough to comfort a single soul. Job heard it once in a tempest. We hear it now, in the still small wind of grace. Every heart that listens in humility will find that God has never ceased to speak. Fact 70. The beauty of becoming. At the end of his long road, Job had not simply survived, he had become. Suffering did not define him, it refined him. He emerged more patient, more compassionate, more aware of the holiness that breathes within all things. This is the secret beauty of endurance. That pain, when met with faith, transforms us into something luminous. Job's scars became his testimony. His wounds became windows for the light of God to shine through. And so it is with us. Our breaking points may one day be the places where divine beauty chooses to dwell. Fact 71. The gift of understanding. When Job's trial had passed, he looked upon the world with new eyes. The same fields, the same sky, yet everything shimmered with deeper truth. He understood that wisdom was not about answers, but awareness, seeing God's presence woven through both joy and sorrow. Understanding had not come through study, but through surrender. It grew like dawn, quietly, dispelling the shadow of his former certainty. He realized that divine purpose is often hidden in what we fear most, and that trust is the truest form of sight. In that calm recognition, Job no longer wrestled with the why. He rested instead in the who, the one whose heart is mercy, whose will is love. Fact 72. The seasons of the soul. As Job aged in grace, he saw that the soul, like the earth, moves through seasons. There is the spring of promise, the summer of abundance, the autumn of loss, and the winter of waiting. He had lived them all, and through each, God remained. He learned that faith is not only for sunshine, it is the warmth that endures the frost. For every soul must someday walk through winter, but none walk it alone. Job's life became a gentle testament that every ending holds the seed of beginning. Seasons pass, but the one who made them remains eternal, turning even our coldest nights into quiet fields of growth. Fact 73. The Circle of Grace. By the time his final years arrived, Job understood that grace is not a line, but a circle. What we lose returns in ways we could not foresee, and what we give away comes back multiplied in spirit. He saw mercy in the faces of his family, in the laughter that filled his house, in the peace that lingered after prayer. The story that began with despair had come full circle into devotion. This is the mystery of grace, that every sorrow, when yielded to God, is gathered, redeemed, and woven back into beauty. And so, Job lived, and loved, and worshipped, his life now a hymn of completed faith. Fact 74. The strength of stillness. In his youth, Job had believed strength was action. Building, tending, speaking, doing. But in his later years, he learned that true strength is found in stillness. The same God who formed mountains also whispers through silence. When Job ceased striving, he found himself upheld by unseen hands. The still heart becomes a sanctuary where divine presence dwells without noise or fear. Job no longer rushed toward answers. He waited in peace. For those who learn to be still before God discover a strength the world cannot imitate, a calm that outlasts every storm. Stillness became his worship, and his quiet became a prayer that continues to echo through every waiting soul. Fact 75. The harvest of compassion. From the ashes of his sorrow grew a tenderness that changed the way Job saw others. He could no longer pass by the weary without pausing, nor hear a cry without responding. Pain had opened the door to empathy. He understood that those who suffer do not need answers. They need arms that hold, eyes that see, and hearts that listen. So Job became a comforter of the broken, a living testimony that wounds, when offered to God, become fountains of mercy. Through him, others found courage to keep believing, and the fields of his latter life were not just full of grain. They were full of kindness, ripened by grace. Fact 76. The glory of the ordinary. As his days slowed, Job discovered holiness hidden in ordinary moments. He found worship in the laughter of a child, prayer in the wind moving through his fields, and gratitude in the warmth of morning light. The miraculous no longer needed to be grand. It only needed to be seen. God was everywhere, woven through every breath and heartbeat. Job realized that life itself is sacred, that even simple rest is a form of praise. And in those quiet hours, when the world turned golden with evening, he would smile and whisper, "It is enough. God has been here all along." Fact 77. The memory of the whirlwind. Sometimes, as he sat beneath the trees, Job would remember the sound of the whirlwind, that holy voice clothed in wind and power. He no longer trembled at the memory. It had become a melody of awe. He realized that the whirlwind had not come to destroy, but to awaken. It had drawn him out of despair into divine wonder. What once frightened him had become the very sound that set him free. And so, when storms gathered on the horizon, Job did not hide. He listened. For he had learned that God can speak through even the fiercest winds, and that every storm holds a hidden whisper of the love that never lets go. Fact 78. The light that teaches. As the sun set each evening over the hills of Uz, Job would watch the horizon fade to gold. In that fading, he found a lesson. Light was not defeated by darkness. It simply rested. Every night was a promise that morning would return. And so, too, was every sorrow, a promise that joy would come again. He began to see that faith is not only endurance, but expectancy, trusting that the dawn will always keep its word. Even as his body aged, his soul remained radiant, reflecting the light of the God he had come to know. Not distant, but near. Not stern, but endlessly tender. Fact 79. The legacy of faith. Job's life became a gentle beacon for those who would come after him. His name carried not tragedy, but triumph. The triumph of faith that endures when all else falls away. He left no grand monuments, no temples built of stone. His legacy was written in the hearts of those who heard his story and found hope again. The memory of his patience became a lantern for generations walking through their own nights of trial. And in the quiet corners of the world, where prayers rise like incense, his spirit seems to whisper still, "Hold on, the morning always follows the night, and God's mercy never fails." Fact 80. The thread of providence. Looking back across the years, Job saw that every joy and sorrow had been woven together by a hand far wiser than his own. The pattern was hidden when he lived it, but radiant when remembered. Each loss had prepared his heart for grace. Each delay had softened his spirit for blessing. Providence is not a straight road. It is a tapestry, stitched with mystery and mercy. Job learned that nothing is wasted. Even tears become threads of light in the fabric of redemption. And as he watched the sun melt into gold across his fields, he understood that life itself is a weaving. And God, the patient weaver, never drops a single thread. Fact 81. The promise of renewal. There were mornings when the air felt new, and Job would stand quietly at his doorway, breathing the scent of earth after rain. He thought of the years behind him and of the mercy that had met him in each one. He had lost much, yet gained something greater, a peace that no season could steal. He began to believe that every ending is only the beginning of something eternal. The cycle of life mirrored God's promise: seed, death, and bloom. Job's heart rested in that rhythm. He had seen decay give way to blossom, ashes give birth to song, and so he trusted the one who makes all things new again, even the weary heart that dares to hope. Fact 82. The gentle descent of peace. In the twilight of his life, Job's days became like the slow fading of a hymn. There was no fear in the dimming, only gratitude. He spoke softly to his family, blessing each one with words shaped by love and wisdom. When night fell, he would sit beneath the stars, feeling the quiet hum of the universe, the same creation he once questioned, now his silent companion. Peace descended, not as a sudden light, but as a long, tender dusk. And as he closed his eyes to rest, he knew what the storm had always been teaching him, that the heart of God is gentler than the winds that carry his voice. Fact 83. The echo of gratitude. Every morning that Job awoke, he offered thanks before speaking a single word. Not because life was perfect, but because it was precious. Gratitude had become the rhythm of his breath. Each inhale, a remembrance of mercy. Each exhale, a quiet offering of praise. He no longer thanked God for things, but within all things. The past, with its wounds, had become soil where new thankfulness grew. And in that gentle exchange between heart and heaven, Job learned that gratitude is not a feeling. It is faith made visible. When the heart chooses thanks, even the smallest moment glows with eternity, and peace becomes not a visitor, but a home. Fact 84. The wisdom of gentle words. In the days of his renewed peace, Job spoke softly, slowly, as one who understood the weight of words. He knew now that language can wound or heal, and that silence often carries more truth than speech. When others came to him in sorrow, he did not offer answers. He offered presence. He listened until their burdens found rest in his quiet. His wisdom had been forged in pain, but it flowed now as kindness. Gentle words are holy things. They mend what reason cannot. Job's voice, once full of lament, had become the sound of calm itself, the kind of tone that turns hearts toward hope and reminds the weary that compassion is the truest form of wisdom. Fact 85. The eternal horizon. As Job's life drew near its sunset, he often gazed beyond the hills where the sky met the earth in shimmering peace. He wondered what lay beyond that horizon, not with fear, but with quiet wonder. He felt that the same God who had restored his days would surely welcome him beyond them. Death no longer seemed an ending, but a doorway into deeper life. And so he waited, not clinging, not dreading, just ready. The horizon glowed like a promise, and Job's heart glowed with it. For he knew now what every pilgrim must learn, that the journey of faith does not end at dusk, it continues into everlasting dawn. Fact 86. The blessing of remembering. As years settled softly behind him, Job found holiness in remembering. He did not dwell on sorrow, but on the grace that had carried him through it. Memory became a sacred garden, each moment a flower watered by mercy. He could trace the hand of God in every joy and in every ache. And when he told his story to his children, his voice was steady, not sorrowful. He spoke of storms not as curses, but as teachers of tenderness. Remembering had become thanksgiving, for every shadow he recalled was now edged in light. And so, his past no longer hurt him. It blessed him, like a hymn of gratitude sung softly in the dark. Fact 87. The quiet reward of faith. Job's reward was not simply the return of what was lost. It was the peace that comes when the heart finally trusts. He had walked through the valley of silence and discovered that God's faithfulness does not depend on circumstance. The world measures reward in silver and success, but heaven measures it in stillness. Job's spirit had become vast and clear, like a lake that reflects only the sky. He found joy not in having, but in being held, being known, being loved. That was the true reward, a faith so quiet and strong that it needed no proof to rest. And in that rest, Job became the very image of serenity itself. Fact 88. The circle unbroken. At last, Job's story came full circle, from blessing to loss, from despair to renewal, from questioning to peace. But the circle did not close. It opened, widening into eternity. For Job's faith was not buried with him. It lives wherever courage meets sorrow and chooses to trust again. His life became a doorway, a reminder that love never truly ends. Even now, when hearts whisper through tears, his legacy lingers like fragrance after rain. The circle of grace turns still, ever expanding, ever bright, until all who wander in darkness find themselves gathered in the endless embrace of God's light. Fact 89. The mercy that endures. Job's final years flowed like a calm river under golden skies. Every sunrise was a new page of grace written by the hand of God. He had come to know mercy not as an idea, but as the air he breathed. It met him in sorrow and carried him into joy. He understood at last that mercy is not earned. It is given freely continually, without measure. When he looked upon his family, his fields, his flock, he saw the fingerprints of compassion in everything. Mercy had pursued him through the storm and found him resting on the other side. And with each passing day, he learned again that the love of God is not momentary. It endures forever. Fact 90. The wisdom of letting go. In the later twilight of his days, Job began to release his hold on the things of earth. He had learned that everything we have is a gift, and every gift must someday be given back. He no longer clung to the fleeting. He cherished, then released. His heart was light, unburdened by fear. He had once gripped tightly in grief, but now he opened his hands in peace. Letting go became his final act of worship. He trusted that what left his grasp was never lost to God. And in that surrender, he discovered a joy greater than possession, the quiet joy of belonging wholly to the one who holds all things and all souls. Fact 91. The eternal rest. When the final evening came, Job lay surrounded by those he loved. The air was still, the lamps burned low, and the sound of gentle breathing filled the room. He smiled, his eyes turned toward the unseen horizon. There was no fear, only rest. He had walked the full circle of life and found that every path led back to grace. As his breath grew quiet, he felt himself lifted, not away from life, but deeper into it. The same God who once spoke through thunder now whispered softly, "Well done, faithful servant." And Job's spirit, wrapped in peace, drifted into the endless dawn. Fact 92. The testimony that never fades. Though centuries have passed, Job's story continues to breathe through every generation. His faith became a living witness, not of perfection, but of perseverance. When the weary lift trembling hands to heaven, they stand in Job's shadow, echoing his courage, sharing his hope. His words are more than ancient poetry. They are balm for the restless heart. He teaches that faith is not destroyed by suffering, but deepened by it. And so, wherever someone prays through pain, his voice is heard again, a gentle reminder that endurance is holy, that our cries do not vanish into silence, but rise like incense to the one who always listens. Fact 93. The mirror of humanity. Job's journey is not distant. It is the mirror of every soul that has ever lived. We too are blessed and broken, lost and found, questioning and believing. His ashes are our own, his dawn, our promise. The book of Job does not end in despair, because life in God never truly ends. In him, we see ourselves, fragile, wondering, and yet unyieldingly beloved. His story invites us to lay down our pride, to bring our sorrows honestly before heaven, and to wait for the light that never fails. Job's humanity makes holiness possible for us all, for it shows that even dust and doubt can become the ground where faith takes root. Fact 94. The God who remains at the heart of Job's story is not man's endurance, but God's constancy. Through storm and silence, through loss and renewal, he remained, steady as the stars, tender as the dawn. Even when Job could not feel his nearness, the divine was holding the thread of his life with unwavering love. The same truth holds for every soul. God remains when all else changes. He is the still point in the turning world, the breath within every prayer, the hand beneath every fall. Job's peace came not from answers, but from rediscovering this truth, that the eternal never leaves, and his mercy endures beyond time. Fact 95. The light that outlives the fire. Though Job's trials ended long ago, their light has never dimmed. Suffering once burned around him like flame, yet from that fire rose a brilliance that endures. Every time someone finds faith in hardship, that same ancient light flickers anew. For the fire that tested Job became the very lamp that guides others. It reminds the weary that endurance is not wasted, and that pain, when lifted to God, becomes illumination. The ashes of loss are not the end. They are the soil of wisdom. And through that wisdom, Job's flame continues to shine quietly across time, warming hearts that shiver in darkness, leading them toward the calm horizon where love and trust meet. Fact 96. The breath of Scripture. The book of Job is not merely written ink, it is breath. The breath of God mingled with the breath of humanity. Each word carries the sigh of pain and the whisper of comfort. It is the sound of heaven bending low to speak with compassion to the earth. Job's voice trembles through those verses, yet behind it, another voice answers. A father calling his child home. When we read those sacred lines, we inhale the same spirit that sustained Job. Scripture itself becomes a living pulse, a steady rhythm reminding us that divine truth is not bound to an age. It speaks today to every heart that listens in the quiet, and in that breath we are revived. Fact 97. The peace beyond questions. In the end, Job did not receive every answer, but he received something greater: peace. The questions that once tormented him no longer needed resolution. They dissolved in the presence of God's reality. For when love is near, understanding becomes less urgent. Job's peace was not ignorance. It was revelation, the discovery that mystery itself can be sacred ground. There, in the silence of trust, he found the rest his heart had sought. And that same peace is offered still, to all who stop striving to comprehend and simply choose to dwell in the gentle assurance that God is enough. Fact 98. The story that sleeps but never ends. The book of Job rests at the heart of Scripture, its pages breathing with quiet endurance. Though its story seems to end, its truth continues to travel across deserts of sorrow, through valleys of doubt, into the secret places where faith is tested. Job's voice still speaks for those who walk through darkness with trembling steps. His pain became a bridge for countless souls, his patience a torch passed down through time. Every reader who sighs over those ancient lines joins the long procession of believers who have found, even in loss, the whisper of eternal hope. Job's story sleeps, but its spirit never does. It lives wherever trust is reborn in the quiet heart. Fact 99. The God of restoration. From the beginning to the end, Job's tale reveals the same divine truth, that God restores. Not always in the way we imagine, but always in the way we most need. He restores peace after confusion, strength after weariness, and faith after fear. The same hands that allowed the storm also shaped the calm that followed. Every chapter of loss became a doorway to compassion. Every unanswered question became an invitation to worship. And in the end, the God of Job was not smaller for the suffering. He was greater, nearer, more beautiful than Job had ever dreamed. This is the promise of restoration, that love is never lost, only transformed into grace. Fact 100. The eternal Amen. As the sacred story closes, a deep stillness settles over the heart. Job's journey has become ours. From wonder to trial, to trust, to rest. We have walked with him through the ashes, listened with him to the thunder, and at last stood with him in the soft glow of mercy's dawn. His faith reminds us that every night will end, and every soul that waits in love will see morning again. So now, as we lay down in quietness, let this truth cradle your spirit. God is faithful, his peace eternal, and his presence closer than your breath. Rest now, beloved pilgrim, beneath the stars of his promise. May your dreams be filled with light and your heart kept in his care. Amen. And now, beloved soul, the pilgrimage draws to its quiet close. You have walked with Job through valleys and sunlight, through silence and song, through dust, through dawn, through mercy. You have seen how sorrow can become sanctuary, how waiting can become worship, and how even ashes can bloom with grace. So breathe deeply now. Let the stories settle within you, like stars sinking into twilight. Each one glimmers with the same truth, that no suffering is wasted and no prayer is unheard. The God who spoke from the whirlwind still whispers softly into your heart tonight. Be still. I am here. The day is over. Its noise and striving fade into memory. What remains is peace, a peace that does not need to be understood, only received. The one who restored Job's joy watches over you now with the same unchanging love. His hands, strong enough to shape the cosmos, are gentle enough to cradle your rest. Let your mind loosen its grip on tomorrow. Let your spirit drift, unafraid, into the arms of eternity. You are safe. You are seen. You are loved beyond measure. And as you sleep beneath heaven's quiet gaze, know that the same light that guided Job guides you still, through every shadow, through every silence, until morning breaks again in grace. If tonight's journey brought calm to your soul, remember to linger in this peace, and, when you wake, share its warmth with another weary heart. If you wish, you may return to walk again through Scripture's hush, to rest again beneath the timeless word. But for now, close your eyes. Let the Spirit's breath become your lullaby. Let his mercy wrap around you like a soft cloak of light. The story is finished, but his love has no end. May peace guard your dreams until morning, and may grace be the first light to greet you when you wake. Sleep well, beloved pilgrim. You are home in his heart. Amen.